Another crucial set of institutions are the economic institutions, the way that our productive activities are organized in terms of the rules, the regulations, the laws that govern the production, trade, and distribution of the goods and services of an economy. Like political institutions, these evolve over time and are shaped by physical geography, shaped by technology, and shaped by ideas and innovations, new ways of organizing economic life that could lead to greater levels of prosperity, or if poorly designed, could lead to poverty or great inequalities between wealth and impoverishment in the society. In the ancient economy, and indeed in the Paleolithic age, the first age of globalization, the economy was rather simple. People foraged, they hunted and gathered and fished to stay alive, and there was no need for or sense of private property ownership. The small bands that foraged together, that lived together and moved together, shared property. The division of labor within that small group was modest. It was defined partly by age, a little bit by gender, but even with regard to gender, it's more and more understood that the women hunted and also the men played their role in child rearing and child raising. And so these were, as best one can judge, looking in part at today's still existing hunting and gathering societies, highly egalitarian, without strong institutions of individual property, certainly, and with limited division of labor. Well, as technologies changed, especially with settled agriculture, living in villages, and then living in larger cities with large armies and with large administrative structures, living in societies that mobilize resources for battle or conquest with other societies, and with advances in the possibilities of economic trade through long-distance trade and through the physical infrastructure such as the roads that supported it, economic life became more and more diverse. The division of labor much more sophisticated. Many people in agriculture, some as slaves, some as individual smallholder farmers, others as owners of large estates, but working in the agricultural sector. Others working in manufacturing or mining or services or public administration or as religious figures, priests and others in the religious community. So a great division of labor. And with the division of labor, inevitably, a more and more complex set of institutions regarding the ownership and disposition of property. Some property became owned by the household, often by the paterfamilias, the male head of the household, without the wife or the children having any legal ability to own property. Some property was owned by the state or by the individual ruler or by the religious community, the temples that were in the hands of religious institutions, not only individual priests, but institutions which guided religious life in the community. And as technologies continued to evolve, as trade continued to spread, as the agricultural surplus enabled the support of a larger non-agricultural community in large cities, with Rome itself in the Roman imperial heights reaching an estimated 1 million population, say around 100 AD, economic life became ever more complex, and the range of economic institutions, how businesses would be organized, how trade would be carried out, how property would be protected, how disputes would be settled, became more and more complex. So just as with political institutions, there was a constant evolution of economic institutions. And as technologies changed life, so economic institutions had to be invented to respond to those changes. And in the fifth age of globalization, the transoceanic age, major inventions of economic institutions took place that enabled resources to flow at the scale of transoceanic empires. And the most notable of these was the invention of what would become the modern corporation, and originally known as a joint stock company, in which individual investors would pool their resources for some kind of venture, such as a venture of putting in shared capital to send a voyage halfway around the world for purposes of international trade, or for purposes of plunder of some wealthy place, or raiding operation of other ships or other port areas halfway around the world. These pooled ventures changed from one-off pooling of resources to putting in capital into standing companies. And new companies such as the East India Company, established in England at the beginning of the 17th century, that is the first years of the 1600s, and a similar Dutch East Indies Company established just about the same years, invented the modern corporation, and invented also one aspect of economic institutional life, which was that these joint stock companies had investors not only of private individuals, but also of government officials. So there was, from the start of large capitalist institutions, an intermingling of private interest and public interest. We would say rather corrupt these days, but that idea of the public and the private being commingled in economic institutions is a very deep pattern. It's a pattern that remains true until today. Well, the modern joint stock company, which became the modern limited liability, publicly owned corporation of the 19th century, is an example of an institutional invention in the economic sphere, which was able to mobilize vast resources in the pursuit of profit and came to dominate the modern industrial economy and now the modern economy in the digital age. Similarly, there were major advantages in the public sphere as well of the economy, because government drew in resources from society to mobilize armies, to build public works, to provide for common defense, to be able to institutionalize a court and penal system and a regulatory system. And in order to do that, governments needed to be able to tax, governments needed to be able to borrow from private wealth owners in increasingly organized capital markets, and to manage debt of the public sector over the longer term. And in order to mobilize and use the resources, the public sector increasingly needed financial instruments, banking instruments, and that gave rise as early as the end of the 17th century to what became first the Bank of England and then central banks around the world, which are essentially the banks of government. So we see tremendous innovation in the economic institutional sphere as well, not only in the technologies used in the economy, but in the way that economic life is organized, is regulated, and is enabled to meet the needs of different parts of society. We'll study that institutional change in the economic sphere throughout our investigation of the 7 ages of globalization.